Hello once again, Martin Popoff here for Overkill Rewind. This is the show where we ask you, our fine viewers, to pick the greatest heavy metal album of a certain year. We're going back to 1990, but before we go there, I just want to mention, don't forget to subscribe, and we'd love it if you supported us on Patreon. Personal memories of 1990, I'm from a small town, Trail, BC, transferred to Toronto, so this was the first time I'm getting to Toronto. I think it was around 1990. Recently married, wasn't in the business yet, I hadn't met Tim Henderson, started Brave Words and Bloody Knuckles magazine with him yet. So 1990 in music, definitely a pretty momentous sort of decade shift at this point. We've got hair metal kind of burning itself out. Grunge is a big deal, but death metal is coming along. Thrash is in a mature state. So there's lots going on in the music world. There was a lot of big political events happening in that year. We've got the reunification of Germany. We've got the launch of the Hubble Space Telescope at that point. Super Bowl that year was a big blowout. The 49ers beat the Broncos 55-10. We had the first Nintendo World Championships were held that year. Nelson Mandela was released from prison after 27 years. Biggest selling album of that year was Janet Jackson, Rhythm Nation. So let's get to the results. 1990, best heavy metal album of 1990. Number 5, we have Entombed with Left Hand Path. I've actually got a CD copy here signed by a couple guys. Left Hand Path was the band's debut album, June 4th, 1990 on Earache Records. This is kind of the start of Swedish death metal. It's considered a Swedish death metal classic, one of the early ones, kind of the introduction of the buzzsaw guitars. This is a pretty heavy, extreme album, but it's actually a little bit of proggy as well. But they definitely have a lot of that European charm that they're bringing to death metal. You know, something that's really coming up in the States as well. LG Petrov, we just lost Lars not too long ago, shockingly. So yeah, that was their first album. Clandestine was next. Then you had Wolverine Blues and To Ride, Shoot Straight, and Speak the Truth. Real mouthful of a title there. But that was kind of their golden period there. Sony had bought Earache and put out a few things. Entombed, Cathedral was another one that came out at the same time. In terms of a general reaction at the time, I don't remember this record really making a lot of waves. I mean, it was their first album. They're on Earache. It's kind of an import situation. Pretty underground at this point, but they quickly really turned a lot of heads as time went on. So there you go, Entombed, Left Hand Path. I'm gonna give this one 3.5 out of 5 skulls. It's not my favorite era of Entombed. I find it, you know, the production's a little rough on it. But yeah, let's go with 3.5 out of 5 skulls. All right, moving on. Number 4 in our list of greatest heavy metal albums of 1990 as voted by you is Cowboys from Hell, Pantera. There's a fully signed copy for you. Sadly, we've lost Vinny and Dime at this point. Pantera, Cowboys from Hell, came out July 24th, 1990. They're on Atco. You know, they had that whole lead up with the indie situation. Phil joins the band at the last album. This is their first major label release. Turned a lot of heads right away. I remember that at the time with this record. It was an instant classic, instant success. Everybody was talking about it. It's a record that had that new kind of gated Terry Date drum sound, you know, with a major cut coming out of Vinny. Some real anthems on this, especially Cowboys from Hell, the title track. I mean, this was seen as a band that was almost like a real Metallica slayer. It was almost like the next step after Metallica. You know, it wasn't death metal, it wasn't thrash, it wasn't nu metal, which didn't even exist yet. It was a hybrid of all these different things. It was absolutely a completely unique sound. In fact, Cowboys from Hell went platinum. I mean, this was a band that sold a lot of records throughout their entire career, but to have a record that heavy go platinum was a pretty cool thing for heavy metal. In terms of a skull rating, I'm gonna give this 4 out of 5 skulls because, you know, up against the next 4 albums, especially Vulgar, you can really tell that there was actually some growth in between there, and this is pretty raw and basic compared to those records. So I'm gonna go 4 out of 5 skulls for Pantera, Cowboys from Hell. All right, moving on. Number 3 in the top heavy metal albums voted by you, our fine viewers, is Slayer with Seasons in the Abyss. Out on Deaf American Records. You know, this was a great album. It's kind of the follow-up in terms of a trilogy from 1986's Rain and Blood, South of Heaven, And then you get Seasons, produced by Rick Rubin and Andy Wallace, who frankly does a lot of the heavy lifting. I think Andy Wallace is a big part of the sound of Slayer. I love this record a lot. I find it to be a little bit of a hybrid between the slower, heavier, more powerful, more bottom end grooves on South of Heaven and the more frantic Rain and Blood style. It was a huge album. It went gold, so here we have another, pretty extreme band being quite heavy. For Seasons in the Abyss, I'm gonna go 5 out of 5 skulls. So we're up to number 2 in top heavy metal albums of 1990. Judas Priest, Painkiller, September 3rd, 1990. They're on Columbia. This is kind of their comeback record after, Turbo is, quote unquote, their hair metal album with the synth guitars. Ram It Down, band relations are not that great. They're trying to be heavy again, but the songwriting was not that good. It wasn't that well received. Dave Holland is out. Scott Travis is in, and he really kicks them up the butt in terms of being, this brash, new, shiny double bass kind of drummer. And Chris Tangerides comes in to produce, so he's replacing Tom Allom. They get a really crystal clear, biting sound. It's a very heavy album. The guys are trying to update their sound a little bit. They're trying to be a little bit more thrash. It's not exactly like that, but yeah, I've got a vinyl copy of it here. You rarely see this thing on vinyl, but there you go. There's a vinyl copy. This great album cover. So really heavy album, well received. The fans really like this. If you're a younger Judas Priest fan, this often wins the polls for greatest Judas Priest album of all time. I certainly wouldn't go there. But yeah, for younger fans, the same way, Black Sabbath fans who are younger really like Heaven and Hell and Mob Rules. This is kind of the next generation of Priest, and it was very well received. It went gold at the time, which was considered quite a success given heavy metal kind of having a little bit of a decline. For Judas Priest, Painkiller, I'm gonna go 3 out of 5 skulls. I know that might be a little contentious, but I can't get over kind of how childish the lyrics are and how they're all about metal and all this. I'm just not a big fan of them not kind of being as cerebral as I perceive them to be anyways in the late 70s. So I found it a little primary colored, so I'm gonna go 3 out of 5 skulls on this one. So here we are, the top album of 1990 in heavy metal as voted by you. It was a landslide, they ran away with it. It's Megadeth with Rust in Peace. There you go. There's 3 of the guys on there. Sadly, Nick Menza is not on this, and sadly, we lost Nick Menza, the drummer. I'm not even that much of a fan of all the previous Megadeth records, to a certain extent. There's faults with all of them, but this is an absolute thrash masterpiece. Dave fires a couple guys and gets in Marty Friedman, who's previously a shredder from the band Cacophony before that, and Nick Menza in as the drummer. So this is the dream team lineup of the 2 Daves, Dave and Dave Jr. Ellefson. An amazing, amazing record produced by Mike Klink. It's cerebral, it's proggy, it's got a really distinct production sound, like a really sizzling steak sort of production sound. It's relentless, but it's very tuneful as well. I always kind of get mad at Dave when he sort of grumbles and complains that, I was never as big as Metallica and all this. But at this point, he's kind of made a record that's as good as any Metallica record. This is an absolute drop-dead classic, and it did amazing out there in the marketplace. It went platinum. Everybody loved Megadeth. It was just a huge success, and as you can see, it ran away with the votes. So there you go. That's the top heavy metal album of 1990 as voted by you. I'm going to go 5 out of 5 skulls on this one because it is absolutely a drop-dead classic. So what else got some votes here in 1990? There were some honorable mentions I wanted to mention. We've got Anthrax with Persistence of Time. I thought it was a little bit of a slip after State of Euphoria. There's a little bit of a jump the shark moment with the Joe Jackson cover of Got the Time. I don't think the album cover is particularly good as well. Not crazy about the production. We've got Death with Spiritual Healing, an absolutely innovative progressive death metal album with Chuck, who we lost a while ago to cancer. But that sort of quintessential Morris sound situation, James Murphy on guitar. But yeah, an absolute classic of death metal. So, this year we've got some really heavy stuff coming in as well. And also on that note, Kreator with Coma of Souls. Here we go with the German thrash contingent. And again, a very heavy album. And staying on that front, another honorable mention that got votes was Obituary with Cause of Death. You know, John Tardy and that whole kind of wild, punky, chaotic, almost like the Damned. They're the Damned of death metal in a certain way. Kind of a cool story about that album cover. It was going to be the Sepultura album cover, but Roadrunner gave it to Obituary instead. So there you go. Of those first 4 honorable mentions, 3 of those are really, really heavy. Maybe not the Anthrax. The 5th honorable mention is Alice in Chains with Facelift. So here you've got the idea of grunge coming in, and obviously it's a very heavy grunge album, one of the heaviest of the whole grunge era. You know, and this kind of like paints a neat symbolic picture, because you had in 1991 the whole Clash of the Titans situation. Alice in Chains was the band coming up on that, and they were a little bit not well received. They were considered a little bit of a butt of the jokes because, you know, they weren't as thrash as everybody else on Clash of the Titans. But you do have that changing of the guard, and it's nice to see that changing of the guard reflected here in our honorable mentions. Some other bands that got some votes were Deicide, Queensryche, Testament, Bathory. But I also get to kind of mention a few things that I would have liked to have seen on this list. Trouble with the self-titled album. They put out a record that was paired, again, working with Rick Rubin, just like Slayer. They put out this self-titled album, followed up with Manic Frustration in '92, an absolute drop-dead doom classic. Love-Hate, Blackout in the Red Room. A lot of people know I'm a big Love-Hate fan. In the sort of dirty hair metal world, I thought they were several times the band that Guns N' Roses was. This was their debut. Everybody loves this record. It's a pretty nasty, gnarly, dirty hair metal record, a classic. I love the next one even more, Wasted in America, but this is a great album, Blackout in the Red Room. Another one I would have liked to have seen on this list, Danzig 2, Lucifuge. My favorite Danzig album, it's either this one or Danzig 4P, which is kind of a really bizarre record, but Danzig 2 just has everything you want out of Danzig. It probably is my favorite. I think it's their vulgar display of power. Another is Suicidal Tendencies with Lights, Camera, Revolution. Not my favorite Suicidal album. I like the Art of Rebellion more, but this was also a really cool album, really kind of a crossover hardcore skate album into thrash. And finally, my last honorable mention is King's X with Faith, Hope, Love. I've always loved this band. All of their records are great, but this was one of, you know, the major label, Megaforce / Atlantic, you know, big classic albums with that distinct King's X sound. Just a shout out I want to mention, July 9th, there's a reissue of Hammers of Misfortune, The Bastard on Cruz del Sur. I love Hammers of Misfortune, that whole thing, Slow Fag, all those kinds of bands. So that's cool to see that thing getting released. And that's it, 1990. Let us know what you think in the comments below. We'd like to hear what you think about our list, the honorable mentions, my list. So that's it this time for Overkill Rewind. We're doing this all the time for different years, so keep your eyes out for the calls for votes. See you again next time.